Alright, vamos a empezar. So, usualmente mis presentaciones aquí son en Spanglish, ¿verdad? Se me hace un poco más fácil hablar en inglés pero, anyways, la presentación es de PlayStation Network, Application Security, Security in General. Mi nombre es Emilio Escobar, yo cobro el equipo de Application Security en el PlayStation Network. Ahora somos Sony Interactive Entertainment. Trabajo en EtherCap, estoy en IRC, Freenode, me gradué de Bayamón, no soy un CISP y todo lo que sea Security, Binary Analysis, todas esas cosas me interesan. Ahí está mi Twitter, si me quieren seguir, no posteo mucho, pero posteo otras cosas. Les recomiendo que no estén en Twitter, si les gustaría esa seguridad que entren a Twitter. Es un buen medio para estar al tanto de lo nuevo que está pasando. Un poquito de la agenda que vamos a discutir es el background de PlayStation Network con seguridad. Básicamente cómo normalmente funciona Application Security en compañía, la generación de Application Security, algo que yo estoy tratando de implementar en mi trabajo. Improvements, qué challenges hemos tenido y cualquier pregunta que puedan tener.
Me dijiste que en Twitter, perdóname, ¿qué era?
¿Perdona?
Perdón.
Es 0, es un 0, pero es que no.
Un 0.
0xx0. No pensé en el font.
Ok, aparece como Emilio Escobar. Ok, ya.
Yo no uso mucho el Twitter.
Mucha gente postea sus blog posts, su research. Si te interesa la cuestión de seguridad, mucha gente, cualquier malware nuevo que sale, la gente hace binary analysis y postea los resultados. Es bueno para empezar y para seguir al día de lo que está sucediendo. Yo lo recomiendo. Ok. So, un poco de background. PlayStation Network obviamente es un target bien grande para lo que somos hackers o que es el Distributed Denial Service. Obviamente en 2011 todo el mundo sabe que estuvimos abajo por un mes por un breach que tuvimos. No me dejaron ponerlo en los slides, pero lo estoy diciendo como quiera. A menos que tú no hayas asistido.
Sí, eso.
Es ridículo. Nos están constantemente atacando, si no es tiros, es fraude, si no es fraude, están probing las aplicaciones todo el tiempo, el network. No hay nada, lo que es Xbox, PlayStation Network, somos bien visibles en el mundo, ¿verdad? So, cuando salen títulos de juegos nuevos, sería bastante funny si yo te tumbo y no puedes jugar el juego que compraste hoy en día. So, we've been target for 350 gigs, DDoS, NTP reflection, DNS reflection, todo tipo de network DDoS que nos pueden tirar, nos han tirado. Resolvimos básicamente poniendo, a mí no es secreto, o sea, tú puedes buscarlo, poniendo Akamai al frente de nosotros. So they handle the DDoS for us. That's how we sort of took care of it. So, ¿qué pasa? So, when you're a big target, obviously, tú sabes, tu seguridad tiene que estar madura, tiene que estar, maturing and growing and improving itself all the time. This is how security, or at least application security, used to be before. I know, what the fuck, right? So, when the incident happened, I actually went to this place as a consultant. And they had no best practices, it was all one network, no secure coding practices, they had passwords everywhere, vulnerable third-party libraries, no security requirements, so nada, absolutamente nada.
They were naked.
Basically, yeah. You gain shell on a server and you had the keys to the kingdom because everything was there. Obviamente aprendieron algo de esto. Como cualquier otra compañía, la seguridad no era prioridad, la prioridad era sacar productos al mercado y hacer dinero. First to market wins, right? So security was never in the picture, not even a thought. Yo trabajo con gente que eran programadores, siguen siendo programadores y me decían, o sea, ellos no se preocupaban de nada. Habían software que tenían bugs de que tú directamente podías pasar del system.exit command en el URL y apagabas en la aplicación. Yeah, it was really bad. So, ¿qué pasa? De esto resultó ser que pues, se implementó un equipo de seguridad en la compañía. Nosotros hacemos de todo, tenemos un equipo que se dedica a Incident Response, tenemos nuestro propio in-house Security Operations Center. We do our own malware analysis, we do our own application security, we do our own application security architecture. Nosotros hacemos very little outsourcing. Por ejemplo, hay un vendor allá afuera que puede hacer el SOC. Many companies do. We have our own in-house. So after you get hacked and you're down for a month, your security budget goes up. So now that nothing has happened, recently security budget is going down. So
You need help with that?
yeah, maybe you don't need to talk. No, but yeah, so it was a good thing, right? You learn from a bad thing, and the important thing is that you learn. So the application security that was established is basically based on Microsoft's STO, which is that one right there. You know, one of the first things that I saw when I joined this company in 2013 was they gave me the secure coding or secure development lifecycle, and security was based on the Microsoft STO, but then you had this section for development that says they're an agile development shop. So how do you do agile when you have to go through all those stages, right? So it just doesn't work. You're always chasing your own tail, because that's what the dog is doing there. You're finding issues late. You know, if you find an issue, they're done with the sprint, they're done with whatever cycle they're working on, and it's already in production, so you know, it's a little too late. And honestly, this was developed by Microsoft, what, in the 90s, the 80s?
Okay, yeah.
So, I mean, my work break in a bank or a government, but not in an industry like ours. So, you know, I saw that and obviously realized that there was a lot of improvement that still needed to be done. There still needs to be a lot of improvement to be done. But we don't have a design stage, we don't have a development stage, I mean we do, but we don't have a testing stage. It's 2 weeks of development, release to production. 2 weeks of development, release to production. And then now they want to go to releasing every day, right? Thanks to DevOps. So that obviously presents a big challenge when it comes to security. So what happened is, you know, many companies have gone through this, right? Again, first to market wins, so now engineering was to deploy, I think Amazon deploys what, like a couple hundred times or 1,000 times a day to the production?
Yep.
Something like that. So how do you make sure your security is in place when you're doing that? So when you're relying on threat models, when you're relying on fuzzing, and I'm not saying don't do them, I'm saying that they need to be done differently. So the new generation, which is what we call ourselves, you know, we're like the children from the corner of the movie. You know, it's a security that works with engineering very well, right? We plan for scaling, we plan for automation, we socialize security. And what does that mean, right? So what that means is usually security is the enemy of the company, right? When you go to an engineering department and you say, hey, I'm in such and such from security, they'll be like, okay. Because usually security is only the bearer of bad news, right? So we're only there to say, hey, by the way, I found something bad in your code, or hey, I found this. So they don't want to hear from us. We're always there to stop releases. We're always there to cause problems, right? So when you socialize security and you say, hey, I'm here to provide you with a service, nobody wants to be the developer, nobody wants to be the product owner, the product manager, the project manager, the VP, the president, or whatever software that gets hacked, right? Nobody wants to be associated with that. Because even us, you know, it happened to us 5 years ago, and to this day, whatever security feature we release, we always get the, okay, yeah, so what? Like two-factor authentication, we finally released that. How long it took us to do it? 5 years, right? So that was like the first comment. So we can't do anything good, right? After you go through a security incident, that's the label you get. So nobody wants that. So how do we socialize it? Well, again, we just say we want the best, right? We want to be secure. We don't want to go through it again. And then also show the good and the bad, right? Like if the development team follow your requirements, if they wrote really good code, you didn't find anything, you pen tested an app, you found crap, it was all good, you show it. You show the results and you celebrate that with them. If they do bad, you also celebrate that with them because it's something that you caught, right? It's better for you to catch it than for somebody else to catch it, right? So that's what that means. Rely on engineering resources. So one of the things that is very clear, and many people have talked about this, is that there is a big lack of skills or talent pool in the security industry, right? I try to hire application security engineers. I find nobody, right? We're not producing security professionals as fast as the business needs them. ¿Cuántos aquí van a la UPR? ¿Cuántos aquí han cogido un curso de seguridad en la UPR? Ahora. Cuando yo fui a la UPR había ninguno. I'm glad actually de que está pasando eso. ¿Cuántos aquí van a la Politécnica? Ninguno, ok.
Yo estudié.
No, el punto es, no estamos produciendo profesionales tan rápido como necesitamos. Yo ahora mismo necesito, por ejemplo, 5 ingenieros. There's not people for that, right? So,
5 ingenieros en
applications and software security, ¿verdad? Es un ejemplo, ¿sabes? El punto es, as a security team, as a security manager, I can't say, oh, I'm going to scale up my team based on business needs, because that's not a realistic picture, right? So you have to plan for scaling, you have to plan for automation. So you have to rely on engineering resources. So how many of you have heard the concept of security champion? So that's something that it's sort of a new trend where we will train like a lead developer of a Scrum team. We will train like an architect or whatever on basic security, and then that person will be responsible for doing threat modeling for us, for finding what we call low-hanging fruits, right? Lo fácil de encontrar en la software. And that's how you make sure that you have enough capacity to run security in your company. And it's not just on the application side, but also on the architecture side, right? If your IT team, information technology team knows how to do network security or how to do host-based security, then you don't need a big security team, right? So that's how you do it. New technology, right? ¿Cuántos aquí han jugado con Docker?
Okay.
So, ¿cuántos aquí saben how to do security for Docker? It's a brand new thing, right? So, and it's still in experimentation, right? The kernel namespaces, all those things, they're sandbox bypass all the time. So, you have to make sure that you have people to take care of the business needs, but not only that, but then take care of the business demands as well, right? My business wants to go to containers, to Docker containers, right? So when they first brought it up, I brought it up to the team, and they had no idea what that was, right? So but then if they're all busy doing day-to-day work, then there's no time to do it. Threat modeling. How many people have heard of threat modeling? There you go. How many of you have actually done a threat model? ¿Cuánto tiempo te cogió? How much time it took you?
Time to compose.
Right? It takes a lot of time. So, every security team or the old school security people want you to do threat model for everything, because that's the only way they know how to bring up threats and how to find threats in the software. But how's that scaling for you, right? Imagine if you have 430 microservices and you're going to threat model all of them at the same time. It's a little hard. Technology, right? It's there. Use it. And so basically, the talk today, what I'm going to emphasize is on how we are trying to improve this and how we've been doing this at PlayStation Network for the last 3 years. So some of the improvements, in-house coding practices, right? So usually companies will have a can, like from SANS, not to diss on SANS, but they have a secure coding practice course, but I have a development background. If I have to put myself through that every year, I will shoot myself. We're building a technical team, right? So, and it's easier to hire a developer and teach them how to secure software than hire somebody who doesn't have a development background, right? So for those of you who are studying computer science, software engineering, it's an easy change to security than somebody who hasn't done any of those, right? Because development teaches you how software works. And when you find software vulnerabilities, you have to know how the software works. Otherwise, it will be extremely hard for you. So some of the things that we're doing also is that we're writing our own security libraries. We're improving security libraries. So not only do we protect the application, but we also write software that runs on them. So that, you know, if I have a software team of developers, that keeps them happy, right? Automation. Google says that every hour that you don't spend on automation, you're not spending in the future of the company. And I think it's true, right? So we're trying to automate some of the things that we can automate, but then the problem with automation is that if you automate everything, some teams go into the mindset of, well, everything is taken care of for me, I don't have to pay attention to anything, right? But then that's when shit happens. So automate but maintain situational awareness, right? Like know what's being found, know how many bugs have you fixed, know how many bugs have you found, what changes need to be made, continuously fix it, and then scale it, right? So vamos a hablar un poquito más de eso. So secure coding training. Obviously, I will be the one on the left, right? Or like a teacher like this. You know, the problem with secure coding training that's canned from companies like SANS is that it doesn't look like the code you write every day. So if you're a developer and I say, hey, go to this website and take a secure coding training, it's not going to look like the code you write every day. So you might be writing Ruby on Rails code, but then I have to teach you Java secure coding. Doesn't work, right? Or when was the last time for any security professional that you've seen a dynamic SQL query be written in code? And if you see it, then yeah, that's pretty bad. You know, we don't see it, right? So we see other harder problems to detect. Why are we providing our own training? And then I talk about scaling, but then yet we're training, right? So training doesn't scale. If you're trying to build a relationship and socializing security with engineering team, if I get up here and I talk about code, then you guys will know that I know how to read and write code, right? So, but yet if I go to you and you never see me except for once a year and say, hey, I found a bug in your code, most likely you're probably going to tell me, like, you know, go away, right? So this helps the team reputations, right? So it makes us more approachable. Security works best when engineering and security are working together rather than they write code, we find bad stuff, rather than just working together, right? So some of the things that we're doing is doing it as a game. I don't know if you've seen gameofhacks.com, but it's from Checkmark Security. Les recomiendo que vayan. It's actually a lot of fun to use. Basically, they have like vulnerable code in different languages, and you have to find what the vulnerability is and identify it. So it's pretty cool, and it's free, so that's why I can talk about it. And then have competitions, right? Like put your developers through it, or you guys go through it and see who wins, and have prizes, or you know, every time you find a bug, you take a shot or whatever. You know, just make it fun, right? Because you should be always learning and have fun at it, right? So some of the things, other things that we're doing, and this is a big slide, sorry, is it's again coding training. We find people with dev backgrounds. We have captured the flag events. So like I said, we have an application security team, but we also have a security operational team. How do we get them to work together? Then I host a CTF, and I invite everyone, even developers, right? So here's a vulnerable VM, find the flags, and then get back to me. And then for us, it's easier to do it because whoever wins, you know, we'll give them like a $100 PSN card or whatever, right? So it doesn't cost the company any money, but it if I'm there and I win $100 that I can go buy 2 or 1 game or whatever, then it's all good, right? I actually have my guys do penetration testing days. So we're busy with our day-to-day life, but then 1 day out of every 2 weeks we just do pen testing. So we go after a few applications, and because when you're doing code review, when you're providing requirements, when you're doing all these things and you don't pen test, it's a skill set that you lose, right? So I don't want that. Contest competitions, like I said. Conference attendance, right? So I recommend you guys, I know you guys are B-sides, that's good, but go to Black Hat, go to DEF CON, go to other B-sides. Submit papers, don't be afraid. You know, the worst thing that can happen to your paper is you get a no. So, and nobody else knows that you got a no. So, you know, so si sometes un papel y te dicen que no, okay, por lo menos yo voy, pero no voy a hablar. But just don't be afraid to do it. You know, build a reputation within the security community. It's a small community. Like I said, follow people on Twitter. Ask them questions. You know, I'm putting myself as a we, but I don't consider myself an expert. But we're people. We're more approachable than most people think. Security meetups. Es algo que también we've done. Meetup.com. I don't know if it's a thing here or not, but yeah. So we have the OWASP San Diego chapter goes to our offices to meet. They also go to Qualcomm and Intuit. So it's not just us, but you know, like I said, finding talent is hard. So the best thing you can do is putting your company out there to people to attract people to go work for you. Allow to work on new technology. So Android 7 comes out. What security improvements were done to Android 7? If I write a mobile app and I need to know what to take advantage of, you know, who's there to train me? The security team, right? So that's what we want the team to do. Publish papers, like I said. We submit pull requests to actual code. So even if it's not a security issue, we submit pull requests to some of the services that we write, and it helps us, you know, work together with engineering, and then again keep it fun, right? So let's try it. So how have we been scaling AppSec, right? I talk about scaling. So relying on engineering resources, I already talked about that. So use technology as much as possible, right? So a lot of security programs will rely on process. You know, oh, there's a standard for this, there's a standard for that, there's a process for this, there's a process for that. But the problem with the process is that there has to be a human behind it. And if there's a human behind it, you're not scaling, right? So we use technology, right? So we use automated scanners, we use static analyzers, we write our own stuff, right? So we use technology to help us with our jobs. We basically provide coding best practices. So what we're trying to build is an internal wiki for developers to say, hey, if you're trying to do this in Node, this is how you securely do it, right? If you're trying to do this in Java, this is how you securely do it. So that way they don't have to expect to come to a human to get that information. They already have a website they can go to. Security requirements, right? So if I want to talk to a database, this is what I need to do. Those kind of things, we have them published, so they already know what they have to do. And then we communicate them ahead of time. So we have a training for every new hire that goes in where we communicate this, we communicate changes, and then we automate repetitive tasks, right? So, simple. Go into automation. And I need to hurry up some. So like I said, we spend in the future, right, by automating. We identify what needs to be automated. So, right, so ¿cuánto ha escuchado de Fortify? How many of you have heard of Fortify? Right, so we use Fortify as one of static analyzers. We use, you know, things like ESLint, right, for JavaScript code. I don't know if you've used it, but if you don't, look at it. It's pretty cool. You can write your own rules, and if the rule triggers, there's no false positive, unless your rule is a false positive. And then we send notifications for manual reviews. So one of the things that we found is that some of the code that actually has been vulnerable were logic issues in the code, not actual static issues, right? So Fortify is not going to pick it up. So you definitely need to do manual review of like sensitive functions of your code. And then dynamic scans, right? So, and don't be afraid to try and fail. I mean, we've tried and we failed, and we've tried and we failed, and we keep failing, right? But that's the whole point of it. So the automation pipeline, right? So I have some prettier slides here, but they told me to get rid of everything that was pretty because they had like product names and product images, so we are not supposed to sponsor any product. So what we did is we have GitHub, that I can talk about. So we have GitHub Enterprise, and GitHub has an option of webhooks, right? So every time somebody submits a pull request, every time somebody submits a push or does a commit or a push, right, to a commit and push, you can get alerted, right? So what we did is we took advantage of that. So we have a bunch of stuff in AWS, and then on every Git push, we get notification of the code that changed, and then we take action appropriately based on the code that changed, right? So if it's a JavaScript file that got changed, and we run ESLint against it. If it's a pom.xml or a packages.json or a gen file or whatever, then we do a library scan against it to make sure they're not using vulnerable libraries. And then we notify, we use Slack. Again, I have the Slack icon, but so if you're a developer and you do a push and something is found, you're gonna get a Slack bot message that say, hey, this commit had this problem, click here to find out, and we take you to a page where it shows you the detailed description. We don't send everything through Slack because Slack is not ours, and if somebody hacks Slack, I don't want them to know what vulnerabilities we have, so it just says that it was an issue found. Or email, right? We allow developers to opt out of the Slack notification and we just get emails. Dependency checks. Dependencies make over 80% of an application. Right? So if you use a Spring MVC app, guess what? Your code is only maybe like 15% of the actual app. So if you're using struts, if you're using, I don't know why you would use struts, but yeah, if you're using it, you can have remote code execution. You can't see it, but that's básicamente some payloads for remote execution and struts. Again, 2011. I can't really say what happened, but so. Yeah, obviously this is very important to us, right? Because so they can have vulnerabilities, right? They can lead to remote code execution. They can lead to all kinds of stuff. How? So you can use different scanners, right? We use SourceClear. We're starting to use them, but for Node.js, there's no security. There's Sneak. There's OAuth dependency scanner or checker. That one is free. No security, I think, is free. And Sneak, I don't know how much it is. But basically, if you do a push, like I said, then we'll run a scan. The cool thing about the product that we use is that if it's a Java app, it will not only tell you if you have a vulnerable version of a dependency, but it would also tell you if you're calling the vulnerable method within that library. So one thing is having a vulnerable version of Apache Commons. The other thing is actually having a vulnerability that you refer to the vulnerable method within Apache Commons, right? So it goes from maybe what we consider critical to a high or higher critical, and we take actions appropriately, right? Static analysis. So I hate 45, not on the record. But it's still something that's needed. If you go to the PCI talk later, I'm sure they will say that PCI requires you to have static analysis done to your code because PCI says so. So it's a checkbox item, right? So yes, we're secure. No, you're not. It is still a fast way of detecting possible vulnerabilities, but you have to go through a lot of false positives, right? So if I write you a code file that has the word password in it, it's going to 20,000 times. Guess what? You're going to get 20,000 alerts. So you have to be a little bit smarter when it comes to static analysis and what tool you use, which is why we're relying more on the ESLint, Breakman for Ruby code, and for things like Java, we have Findbox, we have other things, but 45 is mainly used. We're looking into other things because things like Java 8, it doesn't recognize lambdas in Java 8, which I find it very surprising. ES6, ES7 for like Ember.js and frameworks like that, it doesn't support it, so that's what we have ESLint for. So my message is just use multiple tools, multiple scanners, right? So if you're running an application security team or a program and you have your budget, make sure you budget for multiple tools and multiple scanners, right? Don't say you're only going to spend $20,000, because guess what? 45 is $100,000. And then all your money's gone. So that's sort of what we're doing. By the way, we have, I think the latest is maybe about 20, I think it was about 12 million lines of code per team member that I have on the team. So you definitely need to automate, right? You can't manually review everything. Manual code review. So logic bugs cannot be detected by things like Fortify. It doesn't matter how much you pay them, they're not going to find it. We've had a couple of these, right? So for example, if you have any kind of filter done to your request and the filter looks for a very specific string in the URL and you provide a different one and it takes a different route, that's not going to be found, right? So what do we do, right? So we have a list of, what we do is we configure a list of regular expressions of the file name, of the path name, of the class name, and the method name of things that we are interested in. And then if any of those things are changed and we get an actual email notification or Slack notification with a GitHub link and we go review it. And then that you can adjust, right? So if you get a bunch of false positives, it's better than getting a false negative, so you can adjust accordingly, but that's how we're doing it so far. So it's half scaling, half automating, but then we're still, this is one that still requires human eyes. Dynamic scans. So who went to the REST talk today? Okay. So how do you automate REST dynamic scans? It's a little hard, right? Because you can't spider them, you can't crawl them, you don't know what the links are. There's products like, I think Nextparker does it, supposedly. But I haven't used it, right? So for regular web applications, it's easy. You can use Zap, you can use Arachne. There's actually a REST burp for Burp Suite. If you haven't looked at Burp Suite, I definitely recommend you guys look at it. You can try the free version first. There's a REST burp that basically it loads the Burp Suite jar file, and then you can send it remote. It listens to a web port, and you can send it remote commands. Zap is free. Arachne is free. W3S is free. There's also like WebInspect, AppScan if you want to pay. For regular web applications, they work great, and we're doing them, but we're not writing that many regular web applications. Those are only like marketing websites, which we find a lot of shit on them. It's mostly REST APIs, right? So challenges. I'm going to talk a lot here, but REST APIs, we define REST APIs using a language called RAML. It's a definition language for, there's WDA, WADL, there's Swagger, different ways of you defining your APIs. If you don't know any of them, I recommend you look at them because a lot of companies are using that to start writing code. So if you're a developer writing a RESTful API, you actually first write the definition of the API, and then you have libraries that will convert that into code, and then you add the logic behind it. So definitely worth checking it out. But not everything is done the same, right? So we have one office that uses RAML, we have another office that uses something else, we have another office that uses something else, and then we have an office that doesn't use anything at all. So how do you do it, right? So it's hard. So we try to automate what we can. There's certain stuff that we can't automate, and that's something that we just learn by trying and failing, right? So like I said, don't be afraid of it. Now, some of the changes, they might sound obvious to some people, unfortunately, when you have old school security run, these are big changes, right? So anytime you bring up automation, every time I tell somebody, no, I don't need 20 engineers, I can do with 5, I'll get a lot of pushback, right? So changes are not welcome first. Hiring resources, like I said, is hard. And maintaining the process is hard as well, right? Because it's always changing. There's a new version of Android coming out. There's a new version of iOS. There's this ATS of iOS coming out, so you have to adjust to it. There's new Java, new JavaScript, or new AES, or new Node. So you have to continuously learn and add your... obviously, if I'm a coder, I want to use the latest stuff, but then security has to also use the latest stuff. So it makes it very difficult. When you have 5 security people against 1,000 developers. So it's a big of a challenge. The cultural change goes more on here. Huh? Okay. Yeah. It's accept the new challenges, right? So I personally, and this is my message. This is not PlayStation Network message, right? I should have changed the template of this slide for this one. I think security should be more transparent. I personally believe that if you try something and you succeeded, you should talk about it. Right? So a lot of talks that I go to about AppSec automation, they will say, oh yeah, we've automated, but hopefully I gave you what was allowed to give you from details enough to maybe try something if you're interested in doing it. But if you had a bug and you fixed it, talk about it, right? If you set up an architecture and you've proven that it works, talk about it. Don't talk about open stuff, because then, yeah, if you have a vulnerability, don't come here and say, yeah, we know we have SQL injection here. That's not how it works, right? It's after you fix it. And then have fun during the chaos of running security, right? So it's hard to run security, right? Because you're always you're always attacked, right? So security is a community, share knowledge, solve problems together. I think it was the CTO of Splunk who said that he believes security will be solved when all the companies come together and work security, or something along those lines. If you try to do security on your own, you may lead to that, which is a shell, right? You just got pwned. So learn from other people, go on Twitter. For you younger guys, get on Twitter, learn, read, a lot of reading, don't be afraid of trying, and just play with it and have fun with it. And that was my personal message. Other than that, questions. And I love this, by the way. If you haven't seen Mr. Robot, it's pretty good. What's your address? Is your IP address? Know your local address, a local host address, know your physical address, the MAC address. Anyways, ¿alguna pregunta?
Te hacen Team Development, entonces en Sony Interactive Entertainment en general.
Yep.
Sí.
So, nosotros éramos PlayStation Network antes, nos hicimos Sony Interactive Entertainment, y mi equipo básicamente ahora está a cargo de todo lo que es Sony Interactive Entertainment. So, ahora miramos los consoles o PS4s, web applications, REST applications, marketing websites, legal websites. So, definitivamente necesitamos scaling and automation because otherwise we can't keep up.
Y ahí viene el tema de Docker, para entonces entrar con Continuous Integration, Continuous Deployment.
Yeah. Una ventaja que te da Docker es que si lo implementas bien, let's say you have a Docker image running there's a libc update, right? So Docker tú puedes manejar con lo que se llama Kubernetes, for example. There's also like Rancher and all those things, but Kubernetes lets you bring up a new image of that Docker instance patched, and then lets you bring it up into the pool, right? If you have a load balancer, you bring it up to the pool. When this one doesn't get any traffic, or is done with the traffic, then it goes away, and then you still bring up new
Siempre tiene una instancia limpia.
Yep.
Cool.
Esa es la ventaja de Docker, right? Eso es you always have a clean image and then la otra ventaja es your Docker image for development looks just like your Docker image for production. Mucho lo que pasa es que nuestro non-production environment, por ejemplo, tiene distintas versiones de Apache o whatever, entonces funciona ahí, pero cuando le dan deploy en production tiene problemas, o all the way around, tú sabes, y that's otra de las ventajas de Docker, which is why they want to go for it.
Qué confiado.
Yeah, play with it if you haven't played with it. It's a lot of fun. But la diferencia de Docker a una máquina virtual, para los que no saben, es que Docker you share the same kernel, right? The VM, you have a VM hypervisor, and then you have a running kernel for Linux, Windows, whatever. So my memory space on my Linux VM is not the same as the Windows VM. Docker is shared. So from a security standpoint, it's scary, right? Because you're sharing the same memory. Pero Linux ha sacado lo que dije son kernel namespaces, so you can give your Docker image a namespace, and then you only have access to that namespace. So my other Docker instance doesn't have access to that one. Tú puedes controlar syscalls, bandwidth, all those things. So they're adding things for the container world, and Linux 4.8 just came out this week, and it has more things. ¿Otra pregunta?
How is pronounced Docker?
Yeah. How is
Pronounced D-U or D-O?
D-O-C-K-E.
C-K.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like a duck?
Yeah. Doc.
Like a boat duck, not the animal duck. Yeah, play with it. It's quite entertaining. Try to crash it. Pero, any other questions? ¿Una otra pregunta?
Sí, pero no sé si se puede contestar en cámara, que por qué en Sony Interactive Entertainment hay un API público para los developers en general. Por ejemplo, y en mi opinión personal, la aplicación de PlayStation Network para Android es malísima.
De Android.
La de Android, sí, porque con la que usted la conquistó. Que porque todavía 2016 no existe un API con calls básicos para nosotros construir contra eso.
Number one.
Ok, da.
Sony es una compañía que tiene una reputación de ser bien reservado de muchas cosas.
Ok.
Y
Japonesa.
Poco a poco.
Una compañía japonesa. Es
exacto.
como tratar de cambiar Nintendo, o sea, es como una cultura bien tradicional.
So we can talk later.
That's classified.
But yeah, I mean, you can reverse that. Pero the API no es público, pero sí,
Ya.
it's code you can reverse. Anything else? No? Gracias.
Okay.